October 29th, 1929. Black Tuesday. Men in suits standing on skyscraper ledges. Not to admire the view. They bought stocks with 90% borrowed money. When the latter disappeared, they didn't jump because they were sad. They jumped because the math stopped working. By the end of this, you will know exactly where you would have stood in 1933 and why the guy holding cash looked like a paranoid fool until he didn't. Level 1. Destitute. You don't have a job. You don't have a kitchen. You have a shack made of Coca-Cola billboards and scrap plywood. They call it a Hooverville. A cruel joke named after the president who said prosperity is just around the corner. You sell apples on the corner, 5 cents each. The whole city sells apples. There are so many apples that the price silently hits zero, but you still stand there, because standing is the only thing keeping you from lying down. You check your pockets, not for change. You're looking for a cigarette butt on the ground long enough to light one last drag. But you're still standing. That's the only difference between you and the men on the ledges. They stopped standing. The good news? Rent is $0 when you don't have a door. Level 2. The Employed. You have a job. Public works. $12 a week. You survive. You eat beans. You wear the same shirt for 6 days because laundry costs a dime you don't have. But here's the thing nobody tells you about 1930. Being employed is almost worse than being unemployed because the man next to you got laid off yesterday, and you watch 10 men line up for every one spot that opens. You wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, not from hunger, because the fear of losing the job is worse than the hunger itself. But you're still employed. For now. That's the only thing separating you from level 1, and it's thinner than the newspaper stuffed in your shoes. $12 in 1930 is about $220 in 2024. That's below minimum wage. You'd be working full-time and still eligible for food stamps. The Depression didn't create poverty. It just stopped pretending. Level 3. The Bank Teller. You work behind the counter at a neighborhood bank. You see them come in every day. Gray faces, trembling hands, pulling out their last $5. You're scared too, but you have one thing they don't: keys to the vault. You know who still has money, and you know who emptied out last month. You don't invest. You hoard cash under your mattress. Not because you're wise, because you were never rich enough to play the stock market in the first place. Your father told you in 1925, the market is for people who can afford to lose. But you're still checking. Checking if the bank examiner shows up tomorrow. Checking if the run starts again. Checking if today is the day they hand you the pink slip and you become the gray face on the other side of the counter. You have exactly $47 saved. You call it your emergency fund. Everything is the emergency. Level 4. The Pawnbroker. The Gold Hoarder. People have to sell things. Grandpa's watch? You give them $2. Wedding rings? $1.50. A piano that cost $500 in 1925. You buy it for $8. You don't feel guilty. This is the mechanism of the system. You are not a thief. You are the economy's pressure release valve. But you have a problem. Nobody has money to buy the things you're hoarding. Your shop is full of wedding rings, and nobody's getting married. Your back room has 12 pianos, and nobody has a living room big enough to put one in. But you're still liquid. You have cash. Not much, but more than the people standing in the headline, wearing suits so nobody recognizes them. You charge 25% interest on a $5 loan. That's not illegal in 1930. That's Tuesday. What's above this is where most people stop believing it's real. But it is. And it's uglier than you think. 6 days before the crash, Jesse Livermore was betting against America, shorting the market, borrowing shares he didn't own, selling them, waiting for the price to collapse. On October 29th, while men were stepping off ledges, Livermore was counting $100 million in a single day. He didn't create value, he extracted value from the corpse of the market. This isn't a story about success. This is a story about how the system always has a loophole for the ones willing to swim against the current, and how that loophole has a price. Level 5. The cash holder. You have no stocks. You have a tin box under the floorboards. You were the loser of 1928. Everyone laughed at you for being scared. But you are the king of 1930. You buy your neighbor's house for $400. It was worth $8,000 3 years ago. You buy it with cash, green bills folded in an envelope. You didn't get rich. You became a landlord simply because you weren't greedy. But here's the thing. You're not celebrating. Because you know something the poor don't. The government is coming for your cash. FDR is going to be elected in 1933, and when he is, your hoarded dollars will be worth less every single day. The gold confiscation is coming. The taxes are coming. You survived the crash. Now you have to survive the recovery. You have $12,000 in that tin box. In 1933, that's a fortune. In 1934, after FDR devalues the dollar, it's $8,000 of buying power. You didn't lose to the market. You lost to the printing press. Level 6. The silent monopolist. Howard Hughes. His father invented the drill bit, but Hughes didn't drill for oil. He owned the patent on the bit. When everyone stopped buying oil, they still had to pay him just to fix their old equipment. Here's the only lesson that matters. The man who sells shovels never dies in a gold rush. Neither does the man who holds the patent. At this level, you don't have a job. You have a royalty stream. You don't check bank balances. You check the portfolio. And you don't do it yourself. You have people, an accountant, a lawyer, a man named Charles who manages the trust. But you're still not free because the government is looking at you now, and the press is calling you a capitalist vulture. You donate $5,000 to the mayor's re-election fund. That's not corruption. That's public relations. Level 7. The Rockefellers. The peak. How much did they lose on paper? Hundreds of millions. But the next morning, the driver still started the car. The chef still made scrambled eggs. The private railroad car still took them to Palm Beach. The only difference between Level 6 and Level 7 is that they didn't have to read about the Depression in the newspaper. People read about them in the newspaper. To the Rockefeller, the Great Depression wasn't an economic event. It was dinner conversation. Pass the salt, and by the way, Standard Oil is down 60%. Hand me the butter. There is no level above this in 1933, but even here, at the top of the mountain, Jesse Livermore, the man who made $100 million from the crash, 10 years later in another kind of crash, walked into the cloakroom of a luxury hotel and shot himself. The suicide note was 8 pages long. His conclusion? My life has been a failure. There is still one level above you, but that level doesn't have money. It just has the peace that money can't buy, and even the Rockefeller couldn't find it. Here's what the Great Depression teaches you that no economics class will say out loud. Wealth isn't a number. It's a relationship to time. The man with no money in 1929, but a job in 1933, thought he was poor. He was actually richer than the millionaire who lost everything in the first week because the millionaire ran out of runway. The man with the job still had tomorrow. The people who survived weren't the smartest. They weren't the luckiest. They were the ones who understood that every game changes, and the only way to win is to be holding the right asset when the rules flip. Your 2024 anxiety, The inflation, the layoffs, the feeling that the ladder is moving. It sounded exactly like this in 1930. Same fear, different clothes. Cash is king when everyone else is bleeding. But who stops the bleeding for the king? Trust me, bro. I just summarized 10 years of terror in 10 minutes. The ladder never disappears. It just lowers just enough to crush the ones standing in the wrong spot. Which level do you think you would actually have been at in 1933? Not the one you want, the one your money habits would have put you in.